The explosion comes before she opens her eyes. Not sound, pressure. A wall of hot air that slams through memory and drags her upright in the dark, hand already finding the grip of her M17 before her brain catches up with her body. Emma Walker is on her feet, weapon raised, breathing in hard, shallow pulls. The barracks is empty. No smoke, no breach, no screaming. Just her, chest heaving, finger resting against the trigger guard, the muzzle pointed at a plywood door that leads nowhere dangerous. She hears footsteps, then static from a radio, then something that might be shouting, might be wind. A voice behind her, low, careful. "Stand down, Sergeant. It's not happening. Not this time." She spins. Jack Doyle stands in the doorway, hands visible, moving slow like a man approaching a tripwire. She looks back at the door. The enemy is still there. She can see him. She knows she can see him. Cut to black. FOB. Kharif sat on a gravel shelf cut into the Hindu Kush, like a bad decision someone had stopped arguing about. 300 meters of concertina wire, 12 guard towers, one medevac pad that the pilots called the skillet because it collected heat like a pan left on a stove. The mountains above were beautiful and completely indifferent to everything happening at their feet. The convoys, the patrols, the quiet rotation of men and women who came here and left here changed, or didn't leave at all. Staff Sergeant Emma Walker arrived on a Thursday. No ceremony. A Chinook dropped her and a pallet of water purification tablets at the same time, which felt about right. She had been here before. Different deployment, same gravel, same smell of diesel exhaust, and burned plastic that clung to every FOB in the country like a signature. She knew the layout, knew the chow hall hours, knew which guard tower had the broken heater. She did not need anyone to show her around. That was what she told herself. What she did when the Chinook lifted away and the rotor wash died and the FOB settled back into its ambient noise was stand still for 38 seconds. She counted. 38 seconds of standing in the middle of the landing zone with her duffel at her feet, waiting for something to happen. The familiar metallic taste hit the back of her throat, blood and cordite. It wasn't real. She knew it wasn't real, but her body remembered it as real, and that was the same thing, in the places that mattered. Nothing happened. She picked up her duffel and walked to in-processing. The admin sergeant who checked her in was 22 years old and had the kind of enthusiasm that came from never having experienced the thing he was enthusiastic about. "Welcome back to theater, Staff Sergeant. You're assigned to Route Clearance Platoon, 4th Engineers. Sergeant First Class Morales has your billet assignment." "I know Morales." "Yes, ma'am. He said to tell you." The admin sergeant checked a sticky note on his monitor. "Don't let them put you in the North Barracks. The generator is haunted." Emma almost smiled. "Tell him I'll take my chances." She didn't end up in the North Barracks. She ended up in a 12 by 12 room she shared with a specialist named Tran, and a smell that suggested the previous occupant had strong feelings about beef jerky. Tran was on patrol. Emma unpacked in silence. She lined her gear up with more care than was necessary. Boots at a specific angle. Medical kit accessible without looking. Her M17 in the holster she'd modified herself. Positioned for a cross draw she could execute half asleep. She'd always been organized. Now she was precise in the way that scared people who understood what it meant. 3 months ago, a road in Logar Province had tried to kill her. It had almost worked. The IED that caught Route Clearance Team 7 had been textbook in placement, and Emma had missed it. That was the version of events she carried. The version that woke her up at 0300 with her hand on her pistol and the taste of burning metal at the back of her throat. She had run the route. She had cleared the route. She had given the all clear. Private First Class Decker had been behind her when it went off. He had survived. Both legs, one eye. He was at Walter Reed now, doing the slow math of rebuilding a life from whatever remained. Emma had written him a letter she had never sent, because every draft eventually became an apology, and she didn't think Decker wanted her apologies. She didn't think he thought about her at all. She thought about that too. She was folding her third shirt when someone knocked on the doorframe. "Staff Sergeant Walker?" She didn't reach for her weapon. She was proud of that. The man in the doorway was not military, not currently anyway. He wore civilian contractor clothes, the kind that managed to look both practical and slightly out of place on an FOB. Late 50s, maybe early 60s, with the kind of posture that doesn't leave you even after the uniform does. Gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been hit a few times and hadn't particularly minded. "Jack Doyle," he said, "civilian advisor, force protection and training." I didn't ask. "No, but you were going to." He leaned against the doorframe without entering. A small thing, but Emma noticed it. "Morales asked me to check in with you. Wanted to make sure the transition back was smooth." "It's smooth." "Good." He didn't move. "How many times did you check your sidearm since you landed?" "A beat." "Twice," she said. "Right-handed draw or cross?" "Cross." He nodded, like this confirmed something. "I'm not here to evaluate you, Staff Sergeant. I'm not writing reports. I'm an old man who spent a long time in bad places and has some thoughts about how to function in them. Take it or leave it." Emma considered him. She was good at reading people. It was part of the job, part of the training, and part of a survival instinct that had been sharpened on multiple deployments. What she read from Jack Doyle was not sympathy, not pity, something harder than that, the kind of understanding that came from damage, not textbooks. "Leave it," she said. He nodded. "Fair enough. Chow's at 1800. North Hall. The beef stew is a lie. Get the rice." He left. Emma looked at the doorway for a moment, then finished folding her shirt. She checked her sidearm once more before lights out. Route clearance was the worst job in the Army, and everyone who did it would tell you they wouldn't trade it. The mission was simple in theory: move ahead of a convoy and find the things that would kill the convoy. IEDs, pressure plates, command wires, vehicle-borne devices, anything that turned a road into a kill zone. The equipment helped: the Buffalo, the Husky, the electronic countermeasure systems. But equipment had limits. Equipment missed things. Human pattern recognition, the thing that had kept humans alive in hostile environments for 10,000 years, missed things too. Emma's team was 7 people. She'd worked with 4 of them before, which was better than nothing. SFC Morales ran the platoon. The 2 new guys were Specialist Kim and Private Hansen, both of whom were trying very hard to look like they weren't watching her for signs of whatever they'd heard she had. She briefed the patrol at 0600. Route Kestrel, 14 kilometers. Known threat sectors at grid 47 and grid 92. We go slow. We go methodical. If I stop, everyone stops. Nobody asks why, you just stop. Questions? Hansen raised his hand halfway, then thought better of it. Good. Mount up. The Buffalo rolled out at 6:30, the Husky ahead of it, the mine rollers churning the gravel at the road's edge. Emma rode in the cab with Morales driving, and the countryside sliding past the armored glass in shades of brown and gray. The mountains caught the morning light and turned briefly gold before reverting to something more honest. She watched the road. She always watched the road. It started at grid 4-7, which was where she had expected it to start. The sector had flagged twice in the past month. 1 IED found and cleared. 1 IED detonated against a logistics convoy with no casualties. The ground here was disturbed in patterns she had learned to read without knowing she'd learned them. Loose fill where compacted soil should be. Tire tracks that stopped and started in places that didn't make sense for a vehicle with legitimate business on the road. She called a halt. Husky, hold position. Buffalo, back it up 10 meters. She dismounted. The air hit her. cold at altitude, carrying dust and something faintly chemical she couldn't place. Wind from the east, which meant the mountains were funneling sound in a way that made distances deceptive. She had learned that too. She moved up on foot with her mine detector and her eyes and the particular quality of attention that route clearance bred in people who survived it. 10 meters, 8 meters, 6. The sound started at 5 meters. Not an external sound. The ringing came from inside her own skull, the specific high-frequency tone that had lived behind her left ear since Logar Province. Her audiologist had a name for it. She had a different name for it. She kept moving. 4 meters. 3. The road looked wrong. She was certain it looked wrong, but the certainty felt like the wrong kind of certainty, the kind that came from a brain trying to find patterns everywhere, including places where there were none. She stopped. 2 seconds. 3. Walker? Morales on the radio. Stand by. She crouched, looked at the gravel, looked at the fill pattern, looked at the way the disturbed earth caught the light at a specific angle. It was clean. Nothing here. She stood up. Husky, advance. Clear at 4 to 7. She walked back to the Buffalo. Morales was watching her through the windshield. She climbed in without looking at him. They drove another 40 seconds before he spoke. What'd you see? Nothing. That's what I said. You were stopped for about 8 seconds. I know how long I was stopped, Morales. He let it go. He was good at that. They reached grid 9-2 at 0840. The road here bent around a low ridge that created a natural choke point, the kind of terrain feature that appeared in every ambush doctrine ever written, because terrain didn't change and neither did tactics. To the south, a dried wadi cut a channel through the gravel. To the north, the ridge blocked sight lines for 300 meters. Emma felt the shift before she identified it. Not the ringing, something else. A change in the ambient sound, the quality of the silence between noises. She had heard this described once as the sound of people trying to be quiet, which wasn't precise, but wasn't wrong. Stop the convoy. All elements halt. Walker, what are you? I said halt. The convoy stopped. Emma was already dismounting. She moved to the road's edge, scanning the ridge. Nothing visible. The wadi to the south showed no movement. The wind had picked up, pushing dust in swirling curtains that obscured and revealed in short cycles. Corporal Reyes came up beside her. He'd been with her on 2 deployments. He didn't ask questions when she stopped. He scanned. Anything? She asked. East side of the ridge, something moved. Goat or human? Didn't move like a goat. She keyed her radio. All elements, we have possible eyes on the high ground. Stand by for... The ringing in her left ear spiked. She felt it before she heard it, the pressure change that preceded a mortar round by a fraction of a second. Long enough to know what was coming, not long enough to do anything useful about it. The round hit the wadi, short by 100 meters, badly aimed or a ranging shot. Contact! All elements, contact south. RPM, move the Husky out of the kill zone. Reyes, on me. She was running toward the ditch on the road's north side, the world narrowing to the specific clarity that combat produced. No ringing, no memories, just the immediate geometry of the problem. She heard the second round. This one was closer. 30 meters, close enough to throw gravel. She hit the ditch and got Reyes behind her and started acquiring targets. The fire was suppressed in 11 minutes. Not the most efficient 11 minutes of Emma Walker's career, but everyone was alive at the end of them, which was the metric that mattered. The attackers had been poorly trained or poorly motivated, or both, using a mortar position that exposed their own flank to the ridge. Reyes had spotted the spotter. The QRF arrived at minute 7. The fight was already winding down by minute 9. Emma did a casualty check. Everyone accounted for. Hansen had a cut on his chin from flying gravel. Specialist Kim had burned his hand on a barrel. Both men were functional. She was doing the last check of the road for secondary devices when she came around the front of the Husky and stopped. The EOD tech, Sergeant Briggs, was crouched over something on the road's south shoulder, 60 meters from the wadi. She walked up behind him and looked. A pressure plate assembly, new construction, recently placed. The firing wire ran south toward the wadi, cut clean. Whoever had placed it had cleared out before the fight started, or hadn't had time to connect the initiator. Remote trigger wire's been clipped, Briggs said. Pulled out before they bugged out, probably. If they'd gotten this thing connected, he didn't finish the sentence. Would have caught the Husky on the dismount, Emma said, or the Buffalo. Depends on timing. Emma looked at the assembly, at the wire, at the clean cut. Something moved in the back of her mind, a small, specific recognition that she couldn't quite hold on to. Remote trigger, she said. Yeah, getting more common out here. Third one we found in this sector in 2 months. Briggs began the disposal process. Either they're getting smarter or they've got a new supply line. Intel's looking at it. Emma filed that away. She didn't know why yet, but she filed it away. PFC Decker's file said the IED that hit Route Clearance Team 7 had been initiated by a pressure plate. Emma knew this. She had been told this. She had read the incident report, the EOD findings, the SIG Act entry that reduced the worst moment of her professional life to a grid coordinate and a casualty count. Pressure plate. Contact initiated. She had missed the pressure plate. She had run the route, cleared the route, called it clean. Pressure plate. She sat in the debrief that afternoon and listened to SFC Morales walk through the grid 9-2 contact with a kind of professional detachment that was either admirable or a coping mechanism. And she thought about pressure plates and remote triggers and the way Briggs had said getting more common out here, with the specific off-handedness of a man describing a weather pattern. Jack Doyle was in the back of the room. He had not been in the field. He was there for the debrief, which was his function. He didn't take notes. He watched. Emma didn't look at him. After the debrief, Captain Aldridge stopped her in the hallway. Good work today, Staff Sergeant. Contact management was solid. Thank you, sir. I did notice the stop at 4 to 7. 8 seconds or so. Morales flagged it. False positive. Checked out clean. Aldridge studied her. He was 34 years old and had the eyes of a man who had learned to look at people carefully. Everything okay? Back in the rhythm? Yes, sir. Because the rotation is what it is, but if you need more acclimation time... I'm good, sir. He nodded. He didn't entirely believe her. She could see that too. She walked back to her barracks. She ate the rice at dinner, like Doyle had told her. It was better than the beef stew would have been. 11 days into the rotation, the thing she had been waiting for happened. She was on foot patrol at the south perimeter. Not her primary duty, covering for a team short 2 people due to illness, when the mortar attack began. 2 rounds, northwest sector. The FOB's counter-battery radar acquired immediately, and the response was swift. The attack was almost certainly a harassing fire. Test the response, probe the reaction time, collect data. Standard. Emma was 40 meters from the south gate when the second round hit. It hit the motor pool, which was not a critical structure. A tool shed took most of the blast. No casualties. The whole thing was over in 90 seconds. But for the 8 seconds between the second impact and the all-clear siren, she was back on the road in Logar Province. Not metaphorically, she was there. The smell was different. Logar had smelled like goat dung and irrigation mud, not diesel exhaust. But her nervous system didn't care about smell distinctions. The pressure wave had the same signature. The ringing had the same pitch. And the darkness at the edge of her vision had the same texture as the darkness that had closed in around her when the IED went off and the world had come apart. There was a man 20 meters away. He was moving toward her. She raised her weapon. She acquired him in her sights. She had a clear shot. Her finger moved toward the trigger. Emma. The voice came from behind her left shoulder, low, not panicked. The voice of a man who had seen this before and was not going to make it worse by adding fear to the situation. "Emma, look at the patch." She looked. The man 20 meters away was Corporal Reyes. His unit patch was clear. His hands were visible. He was running toward her not as a threat, but because the all-clear siren had just sounded and he was doing a head count. She lowered her weapon. She stood very still for a long moment. Reyes had seen it. He slowed to a walk. His face said nothing about what he'd seen, but she knew he'd seen it. She turned around. Jack Doyle was standing 5 meters behind her. She holstered her weapon without a word and walked back toward the barracks. He didn't follow her. He didn't need to. She sat on her bunk for 20 minutes without moving. She thought about Decker. She thought about the road. She thought about what would have happened if the light had been different, or Doyle hadn't been there, or Reyes had been moving in a way that looked less clearly like Reyes. She thought about what she had almost done. She understood with the specific, cold clarity of someone who has processed bad information and arrived at a bad conclusion that she was no longer afraid of the enemy. She was afraid of herself. That was twist one, though she wouldn't have called it that. She would have called it the truth, arriving late. She didn't sleep that night, not unusual. Sleep had been negotiable since Logar Province, something she bargained for in 2 or 3 hour increments and rarely achieved fully. But this night was different in quality. Other nights, the failure to sleep was a physical thing. Her body too keyed up, the dream waiting just below the surface like a trapdoor. This night, she was completely awake and completely still and completely occupied with a single question. How many times had this almost happened before? She ran through the past 11 days like an incident report. The pause at grid 47. The 8 seconds on the road. The way she'd gripped her weapon during the debrief when Morales raised his voice. The 3 mornings she'd woken up with her hand already on her M17, finger inside the trigger guard, the safety off. She was meticulous and honest in this inventory, which was both her best quality and the reason the inventory was so disturbing. She didn't minimize, she cataloged. She thought about Captain Aldridge's question. Everything okay? Back in the rhythm? She thought about what it would mean to answer that honestly. The Army had systems for this. MRPs, behavioral health, a chain of command that was theoretically equipped to handle what she was going through. She understood these systems in the same way she understood the water purification tablets that had arrived with her on the Chinook. Useful, important, and absolutely not something she was going to use voluntarily. Because using them meant being pulled. Pulled meant her team operating short. Short meant the gap she left being filled by someone less experienced. Someone who would have to learn the route sectors she already knew, the pattern deviations, the terrain signatures. She didn't let herself examine whether this logic was sound. It felt sound. That was what mattered at 0300. At 0330, someone knocked on her doorframe. Doyle. Same contractor clothes. Coffee in 2 cups, one held out. She took it without speaking. He sat down on Tran's empty bunk. Tran was on a 72-hour rotation, and drank his coffee and didn't say anything for almost 4 minutes. "I'm not going to report it," he said finally. "I know. Reyes isn't either. I know that too." Reyes was the kind of soldier who handled things inside the team. He would watch her more carefully now. He would be a second set of eyes she hadn't asked for. It was the best possible outcome given the circumstances, and she didn't entirely hate it. Doyle turned his cup slowly. "First time it happened in the field?" "No." "First time it almost cost you something?" She didn't answer. He nodded. "Right. I know what it is," she said. "I'm not confused about the diagnosis." "I know you're not. I know the tools, grounding techniques, pattern interruption. I've done the reading. Reading's not the same as the thing." He said it without judgment. "The thing has a different physics. Can't read your way through physics." She looked at him. "What did it feel like? Yours?" He considered the question. She appreciated that he didn't answer immediately, didn't reach for the comfortable phrase. He sat with it. Like being two people, he said finally. One person trying to function. One person watching a replay on a screen I couldn't turn off. The problem isn't that you can't tell the difference. The problem is that the replay feels more real than what's in front of you. Because it happened. What's in front of you is just what's happening now. Emma thought about the man 20 meters away who had been Reyes and not Reyes at the same time. How long, she asked, before I could trust myself? Yes. Long time. He finished his coffee. But that's not really the question, is it? The question is whether you can function safely right now. And the answer is you almost didn't. She said nothing. I'm not reporting it, he said, but you need to know that the next time it happens, you might not have an 8-second window. You might not have me standing behind you. And the next person in those sights might not be Reyes. He stood up. Get some sleep. I told you I'm not. Try anyway. He set his empty cup on her footlocker. I'll see you at first light. He left. She lay back on her bunk and looked at the ceiling and did not sleep. But she tried. That was something. At 0540, she was at her gear. At 0600, she was in the briefing. At 0630, she was on the Buffalo rolling back toward Route Kestrel. She watched the road. She was good at this. Whatever else was happening inside her skull, she was genuinely good at reading terrain, finding disturbances, catching the small asymmetries that meant someone had been working on the road when they shouldn't have been. That skill hadn't left her. The question was whether she could trust it. At grid 9-2, she found 2 pressure plates and a command wire that led north toward the ridge. Both plates were new construction, placed within the last 24 hours. She cleared them methodically and without incident, and stood up feeling something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite relief. Good catch, Morales said. She didn't answer. She was looking at the command wire, thinking about the remote trigger assembly Briggs had found 11 days ago, thinking about the word he'd used, common, thinking about Logar Province and a pressure plate that the incident report said she had missed. She pulled on that thread for a moment, felt it resist, and let it go. Not yet. Whatever was at the end of that thread, it wasn't ready to come free yet. She climbed back into the Buffalo. They rolled on. The mortar attacks started coming every other night. Not sustained barrages, nothing that would justify a full tactical response or bring additional assets to the FOB. Just enough. 2 rounds, sometimes 3, always between 0-200 and 0-400, always hitting non-critical infrastructure. The motor pool, the south perimeter berm. Once, the water purification station, which actually did cause problems, though problems of the logistical rather than lethal variety. FOB Kharif's S2 called it harassment fire. The official assessment was that a small insurgent cell was using the FOB as a training opportunity, practicing their fire missions against a target that would shoot back, but not decisively. It was annoying in the way that a persistent leak is annoying, not catastrophic, just unrelenting. For Emma Walker, it was something else. The ringing in her left ear came back during the second attack. Not the combat clarity she'd felt at grid 9-2, the narrowing, the focus, the useful adrenaline that made her good at her job. The other kind, the kind that came with the smell of cordite that wasn't there, and the pressure wave she felt in memory before she felt it in reality. She managed it. She got out of her bunk, got her kit, took her position at the south perimeter the way the duty roster required. She watched her sectors. She filed her report. She went back to her bunk at the all clear. But she didn't sleep. By the 4th attack, she stopped trying. Sleep deprivation had its own physics, and Emma knew them well enough to track her own deterioration with professional detachment. The first 48 hours were manageable. Decreased fine motor control, marginal impact on decision-making, easily compensated for with caffeine and discipline. Hours 72 to 96 were where things got complicated. Reaction times lagged. Pattern recognition started misfiring, finding connections that weren't there, missing ones that were. After 96 hours, the brain started producing its own entertainment. She was on her 14th day of the rotation when she first heard the children. It was 03:15. The third mortar attack of the week had ended 40 minutes ago, and the FOB had settled back into its nervous quiet. She was sitting on the edge of her bunk in the dark, not trying to sleep, just managing the time until first light. Tran was asleep across the room, breathing in the deep, infuriating rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. And then she heard it. Crying. A child's crying, high-pitched and rhythmic, coming from somewhere outside. She sat very still. The FOB did not have children. Children were a thing that happened outside the wire, in the villages and compounds that the patrols moved through and the convoys bypassed. A child's voice at FOB Kharif at 0315 was not possible. She listened for 45 seconds, counting. The crying continued, faded slightly, came back. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark FOB. Nothing moved. The guard towers were lit. The generator hummed. The space between the barracks and the wire was empty. The crying stopped. She stood at the window for another minute, then turned back to her bunk. Her radio was on the footlocker. She picked it up, clicked to the guard frequency, and listened. The radio hissed with its normal static, the ambient noise of a system breathing. And for a moment, in the texture of that static, she could almost hear something that shaped itself toward a rhythm. Almost. She set the radio down. She knew what this was. She had read about it in the long, careful readings she'd done in the weeks after Logar Province, trying to understand what was happening to her own nervous system. Auditory hallucinations in PTSD were common, particularly during sleep deprivation, particularly in environments with ambient noise that the brain could pattern match into meaningful sounds. The brain was a meaning-making machine. Give it insufficient input and it manufactured its own. She knew this. Knowing it did not make the crying less real. She sat back down on her bunk and waited for morning. Morales noticed. He was too professional to say anything directly, and too good a soldier to pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. What he did was adjust the patrol assignments, pulling Emma from the overnight positions and putting her on the day routes where the light was better and the texture of the terrain was easier to read without full sleep behind you. She didn't thank him for it. She didn't acknowledge it. They both understood this was the correct way to handle it. Jack Doyle fell into step beside her during the morning PT run on the 8th day after the mortar attacks began. He was faster than he looked. 62 years old, and he ran like a man who had been told pain was optional and had chosen to decline. "You look like garbage," he said. "Good morning to you too. When did you last sleep more than 2 hours?" "I sleep fine." "Emma," she glanced at him. The use of her first name was not nothing. He'd been careful with that. 4 days, she said, maybe 4.5. He absorbed this without visible reaction. "What's happening?" "Attacks every other night. I can't..." She stopped. "Reorganized. The attacks are resetting my system every time I get close to a full cycle. By the time I'm back down, it's almost time for the next one." "That's part of it." "Yes." "What's the other part?" She ran for 30 seconds before answering. "Sounds. In the room. I know what they are." "Good. That matters." He was quiet for a moment. "What kind of sounds?" "Children." He didn't react to this either. "Radio static?" "Yes, I think so. The static has a frequency range that can..." "The brain pareidolia effect, auditory version." "Right." He matched her pace exactly. "Does knowing that make it stop?" "No." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. Knowing the mechanism of a thing is not the same as being outside the thing. You're a very good engineer, Walker. You understand systems. You think understanding the system means you can fix it from inside. Can't I? Not this one. Not alone. She didn't respond. I'm not telling you to go to Aldridge, he said. I know what that means for your team. I'm telling you to stop fighting the sleep. Fighting it is making it worse. If I stop fighting it, I dream. I know. And when I dream, I know that too. She looked at him. How long did it take before you could sleep through a full night without? Longer than you want to hear. Tell me anyway. He considered. 3 years before the nightmares stopped being every night. 6 before they stopped being most nights. He said it factually. But that's without any help. I was stubborn and stupid, and I thought I could outrun it by staying busy. I cannot recommend that approach. What approach do you recommend? Letting someone in. I'm talking to you. You're talking at me. There's a difference. He slowed as they came around the north end of the track. The difference is trust. You're reporting information. You're not asking for anything. Emma thought about this. What would asking look like? I don't know. That's your work to figure out. He peeled off toward the contractor housing. Chow's at 6. Eat something that isn't coffee. She watched him go and kept running. She ate breakfast. She went on the morning route. She found nothing on the road and called it clean and came back and wrote her report. She went to bed at 1400 and slept for 3 hours before the image woke her. Not a sound this time. A picture. Decker's face in the moment before the IED went off, turning back toward her to say something. She could never remember what. In the dream, it was always a word she couldn't hear. And then the light. And then nothing. She sat up, checked her weapon. Safety on. That was something. The safety had been on. She went back to the morning's route report and read it again. Found 2 things she'd noted in shorthand that deserved more detail. Rewrote those sections. Filed the revision. At 17:30, Jack Doyle knocked on her doorframe with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who had decided something. Sit down, he said. I'm already. I know. Sit down anyway. She sat. He gave her the coffee and sat on Tran's bunk. I want to tell you something, he said. Not as advice, just a thing that happened. She waited. Iraq, 2006. I was running a patrol through Ramadi, South Sector. 3 of my guys had been killed in the previous 2 weeks. IED, sniper, IED again. I was not okay, different texture than what you're carrying, but the physics were the same. He turned his cup. We came through a market, crowded, middle of the day. Man moved toward me fast from the left. Just a civilian trying to get past us on the street. Nothing in his hands, nothing wrong. I had my weapon up and my finger on the trigger before I processed what I was seeing. He stopped. What happened? Emma asked. My sergeant grabbed my barrel, pushed it down, said, Jack, just my name, nothing else. He was quiet for a moment. The man on the street never even knew. He just walked past. But I stood there in the middle of that market, knowing I had been 1 word away from killing an innocent person because my nervous system had stopped distinguishing between the past and the present. The barracks was quiet. I went to behavioral health the next day, Doyle said. Took me off the line for 30 days. I was furious about it. I thought they were breaking my team. He looked at her steadily. My team was fine. They had a good sergeant fill in. 30 days later, I came back and I was better. Not fixed, better. Emma looked at her coffee. I'm not going to tell you to do the same thing, he said. That's your call to make. But I needed you to know I'd been where you're standing. Not similar, the same place. She sat with that for a long moment. I can't go now, she said finally. The rotation. I know. 30 days out means the team is short through the back half of the rotation. Morales is already running lean. I know that too. So I finish the rotation, she said, and then I go. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not approval exactly, but a kind of careful relief. That's a real thing. That's not someday. That's a commitment. That's what I said. I heard you, he stood. Get some sleep tonight. I'll sit outside your door for the first couple hours. That's, she started to say, unnecessary. Stopped. Thought about 3 years of every night, 6 years of most nights. Okay, she said instead. Okay, he said. He sat outside her door that night. She slept for 5 hours straight. She did not dream. It was the best night she'd had in 4 months. She told herself not to get used to it. The next 6 days were better. Not good. Emma had stopped expecting good. But better had its own value. A narrower margin between the ringing and her response to it. A small improvement in her ability to identify the sound source before her body acted on the threat signal. She slept in 3 and 4 hour blocks. She ate regularly. She ran in the mornings and worked through the routes methodically and brought her team home at the end of each day. Doyle didn't hover. He checked in at intervals that were useful rather than intrusive. Coffee at 05:30, a brief conversation after debrief, occasional observations that were more question than advice. She started talking to him differently, not reporting information, asking things. She asked him how he'd learned to recognize the difference between a real threat and a remembered one. He'd said, "You don't recognize it in the moment. You recognize it in the second after. The margin gets smaller over time. Right now you're working with maybe a 5-second window. Someday it'll be 1 second. That's enough." She asked him what he did when the replay started. He'd said, "Name 5 things I can touch." It sounds stupid. It works anyway. She started trying it. It worked in the way that inconvenient solutions often work. Not elegantly, but functionally. On the 19th day of the rotation, she went on a night route for the first time since the attacks began. She came back clean. No incidents, no freezes, no sounds that weren't there. She sat outside afterward and looked at the mountains in the dark and thought, maybe this is going to be all right. She knew better than to think that. She'd read enough to know that false recovery was a stage, a dangerous one because it lowered your guard. She knew it intellectually the same way she knew the mechanics of auditory hallucinations. She let herself feel it anyway, just for one night. Doyle found her sitting outside. "Good patrol," he said. "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you're not going to add something." He sat down beside her. "I wasn't going to add anything." She glanced at him. "I was going to say, one night is one night. That's the whole statement." "I know." "Good." He looked at the mountains. "You know what I find genuinely strange about this country?" "What?" "How beautiful it is. How completely indifferent the landscape is to what people do in it." He was quiet for a moment. "You can blow up a road, and 3 weeks later it looks like nothing happened. The mountains don't care. The wind doesn't care." He glanced at her. "Sometimes that's comforting. Sometimes it isn't." "Right now?" "Right now it's comforting," he said. "We're both still here. That's something." She didn't answer, but she didn't go inside either. They sat there for a while in the cold mountain air, watching the dark shapes of the Hindu Kush hold their position against the sky. The mortar attack on day 21 came at 01:45 and lasted 4 minutes. This one was different. Not in intensity. The rounds themselves were no more accurate than usual. No heavier caliber. No change in the basic harassing pattern that S2 had documented. The difference was inside Emma's skull, where something had been wound very tight over 21 days and had quietly, without announcement, reached its limit. She was out of her bunk before she registered being awake. Standard. She had her kit and her weapon, and she was through the barracks door in under 30 seconds, which was good. It was what the drills required, and she was a person who met requirements. What wasn't standard was the moment she hit the open air and heard the third round hit the north berm. The sound folded. She felt it happen, the specific cognitive collapse she had read about and experienced in fragments, but never this completely. The FOB's ambient noise, the shouting of NCOs getting personnel into position, the generator's mechanical hum, the distant crack of counterfire, all of it telescoped down to a single point that wasn't located in the present. She was on the road in Logar Province. Not a flash, not a fragment, the whole thing. The weight of the body armor, the smell of the irrigation mud. Decker's voice on the radio saying, "Coming up on the grid, all clear so far." Her own hands on the detector, the specific quality of the morning light, and the split second where she had looked at the road and made her call. Clear. She heard the IED go off. She felt it. All of it. The pressure, the heat at the periphery, the sound that wasn't sound but a sudden subtraction of all other sound. She was on one knee on the gravel of FOB Kharif, weapon up, pointing at the berm. Something moved at the berm. She had a figure in her sights. "Walker!" Reyes, somewhere behind her and to the right. "Walker, stand down. That's Hernandez on the wall." The ringing in her left ear was so loud she felt it in her molars. She held the trigger. 5 seconds. 5 things you can touch. The grip of her M17. Cold. Textured polymer. Real. The gravel under her knee. Real. The cold air on her face. Real. The sound of Reyes's voice saying her name, not in memory, in actual space. The 5th thing she reached for was the weight of her body armor, the specific pressure of the plates against her chest and back. Present tense. Not Logar Province, not 3 months ago. Here. She lowered her weapon. Hernandez was on the berm, doing his job, not a threat. She stayed on one knee for a long moment, breathing, while the counter-battery response played out around her, and the FOB came back into focus. She watched Hernandez's silhouette on the wall, the way he moved, the way he checked his sectors, the completely ordinary mechanics of a soldier doing his job in the middle of a mortar attack. There was nothing threatening about any of it. There had never been anything threatening about any of it. Her brain had decided otherwise. That was the part she couldn't argue with. She could know the mechanism. She could name 5 things. She could use every tool she'd been given and every tool she'd found, and still, at the edge of the performance envelope, her nervous system was going to reach for the worst available interpretation and act on it with the speed and certainty that training had hardwired into her. The training was for real threats. Her nervous system had stopped caring about the distinction. She thought about what that meant for the people around her. Not herself. She'd made a kind of peace with the personal cost, or at least she was working on it. But Hernandez hadn't asked to be acquired by a friendly weapon during a mortar attack. Reyes hadn't asked to be the person who noticed and had to make the call to say her name. They were carrying the weight of her problem too. They just weren't saying so. Reyes crouched beside her. He put a hand on her shoulder, a small, deliberate thing. He didn't say anything about what he'd seen. "You good?" "No," she said, "but I'm here." He nodded. "Good enough. On your feet." She got up. She went to her position. She did her job for the remaining 20 minutes of the attack. She did it correctly. But when the all clear sounded and the FOB returned to its post-incident routine, she sat down against the south wall and shook for 3 minutes. She let herself shake. Trying to stop it was fighting the system, and she was done fighting the system. After 3 minutes, it stopped. She stood up and went back inside. Doyle was in her barracks room at 0400. Not waiting outside the door this time, actually inside, sitting on Tran's bunk in the dark with his coffee, in the specific stillness of a man who has been awake for a long time and is not surprised by anything. Tran was on a 48-hour rotation. The room was just the two of them. Emma came in, stripped her kit, and sat on her bunk. "I almost shot Hernandez," she said. "I know. I held for 5 seconds." "I know, Reyes told me." "The 5 things technique, it worked." "It worked this time." She looked at him. "You're going to tell me that means I need to go to Aldridge." "I'm going to tell you that you're now a direct threat to your own personnel." He said it without aggression, just the flat, factual delivery of someone who had been careful not to say it until it was undeniably true. That's different from being a threat to yourself. That changes the math. She knew he was right. She had known it, on some level, from the moment she lowered her weapon and saw Hernandez on the berm. There was a line between managing a personal crisis and creating a risk for people who depended on her, and she had crossed it. "If I go to Aldridge," she said, "he pulls me. Rotation's halfway done. Morales is 2 people short already. Chen transferred out last week." Yes. The gap I leave is real. People who fill gaps in understrength units get hurt. Yes, he said again. That's true. It's also true that you just came within 5 seconds and one bad moment of shooting a soldier on your own perimeter. The room was very quiet. "Your enemy isn't out there anymore," he said. He touched the side of his own head. "It's in here. And right now you're taking it on patrol with you." She sat with that. "I don't know what to do," she said. And the saying of it was its own thing. She was not a person who said that easily, and they both knew it, and the fact that she had said it without qualifying it was a kind of asking. The kind Doyle had told her she needed to learn. "First thing," he said, "is you tell me what you remember about the IED, the one in Logar. Walk me through it." "Why?" "Because I want to hear it, all of it, not the incident report version." She looked at him for a moment, then she started talking. She talked for 40 minutes. Doyle didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer reframes or corrections or the comforting alternative interpretations she'd half expected. He just listened with the specific quality of attention she had come to recognize as his particular competence. The kind of listening that made you feel the thing you were saying was being received rather than evaluated. She told him about the route, the morning, the light, Decker's voice on the radio, the moment she'd looked at the road and made her call. Clear. She told him about the weight she'd carried since, the incident report that said, "Pressure plate, contact initiated," the certainty she'd built, over 3 months, that she had missed it, that Decker had paid the price for her failure. When she finished, Doyle was quiet for a moment. "The incident report," he said. "You read the EOD findings?" "Yes." "The complete findings, including the initiator analysis?" She frowned. "They classified the technical details. Need to know. I only had access to the summary." Doyle reached into his jacket pocket and put a folded document on the footlocker between them. It was printed on standard paper, unclassified header. "I'm an advisor to Force Protection," he said. "I have access to the technical analyses. I pulled this last week." He pushed it toward her. "Read the initiator section." She picked it up. The EOD technical analysis of the Logar Province, IED, was 3 pages of dense technical language that she read in approximately 90 seconds. She read the initiator section twice. "Command wire assembly consistent with remote electronic initiation. Pressure plate component present, but assessed as secondary/backup mechanism. Primary initiation method, radio frequency trigger, estimated trigger distance 200 to 400 meters. Device orientation and placement consistent with command detonation rather than contact detonation." She set the paper down. "It wasn't a pressure plate," she said. "Not primarily. The pressure plate was there. It would have gone off if the convoy had hit it. But whoever built that device used an RF trigger. They were watching. They chose when to set it off." The incident report summary used IED and pressure plate as shorthand. The technical finding was in the full EOD analysis, which requires a different clearance level. He looked at her steadily. "You didn't miss a pressure plate, Walker. A man 400 meters away decided to push a button. You were never going to see that coming." The barracks room was very still. Emma looked at the paper on the footlocker. 3 months. 3 months of waking up at 0300 with her hand on her weapon and the weight of Decker's injuries pressing on her chest like a second set of body armor plates. 3 months of running the route in her head, looking for the moment she had failed, the signs she had missed, the thing that a better soldier would have caught. There was no moment. There was no sign. There was a man with a radio transmitter who had waited for the right second and pressed a button. She had been carrying a guilt that had no foundation, a story about her own failure that was factually incorrect. The fact of this was so large and so sudden that she couldn't immediately find the edges of it. She sat with it the way you sit with a piece of information that is going to take time to become real. Why didn't they tell me? Her voice was steady. She was pleased about that. They told you what the summary said. The summary wasn't wrong. The pressure plate was there. But it wasn't complete. He paused. I don't know if it was a deliberate omission or just the way the paperwork shook out, but you deserved the full picture. She thought about the past 3 months, about the letter to Decker she'd never sent, about the 8 seconds on the road at grid 47, about Reyes running toward her and her finger on the trigger, about everything she had carried that she didn't have to carry. I'm angry, she said. It wasn't a warning, just an observation. That's fair. I'm also, she stopped, tried to find the word. The weight is different. It doesn't go away, but it's different. Yes, he said, it will be. For a while, it'll be the same weight with a different shape. Over time, the shape becomes something you can actually set down. She looked at the paper again, at the words radio frequency trigger, and at the phrase Briggs had used 11 days ago, crouched over the assembly at grid 9-2. Getting more common out here. The same thought she'd had then, the thread she'd pulled on and let go, pulled taut again. She filed it away. Not yet, but soon. I'll talk to Aldridge in the morning, she said. Okay. Tonight I need to sleep. Okay. He stood. I'll be outside. You don't have to. I know. He was already at the door. 5 hours. Try for 5. She lay back on her bunk. She was angry. She was exhausted. She was carrying 3 months of false guilt that had just been reclassified, but not yet fully dissolved. She slept for 6 hours. When she woke up, she felt the absence of something. Not healed, not resolved, but a weight that had been load-bearing and was now, quietly, beginning to shift. She didn't talk to Aldridge in the morning. She made it to the hallway outside his office at 7:20. She stood there for 4 minutes. She went back to her barracks. This was not cowardice. She understood the distinction. It was the specific paralysis that came from knowing the right move intellectually and not yet being able to execute it because the execution required something she hadn't fully located yet. She went on the morning route instead. She found an anomaly at grid 6-4, disturbed soil, fresh, in a pattern she recognized, and called a halt and ran the detector over it for 12 careful minutes before concluding the disturbed soil was from a scavenging dog or a goat and not from anyone planting anything. She was on the Buffalo heading back when the FOB went to threat level red. The radio call came from Sergeant First Class Cole, the watch NCO. All elements, Kharif has declared TLR. Report to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Emma looked at Morales. That's not a mortar alarm, he said. No, she keyed her radio. Kharif TOC, this is route clearance Sierra, inbound, ETA 8 minutes. What's the threat? TOC. Sierra, we have eyes on multiple vehicle movement, west approach. Estimated, standby, estimated 7 to 9 vehicles. Armed personnel confirmed. QRF is deploying. All inbound elements expedite return. 7 to 9 vehicles. That wasn't a harassing force. They made it back to the FOB in 6 minutes. The west approach was already visible from the main gate. Dust trails that moved with the organized urgency of something that knew where it was going. Emma dismounted before the Buffalo fully stopped. and went straight to the TOC for a situation report. Captain Aldridge was at the tactical display. The look on his face was the specific look of a commander who has received bad news and is in the process of converting it into decisions. "Walker, good timing," he pointed at the display. "West wall is primary. We've got movement on the east wall too, smaller force, maybe 4 to 6, but it's there. I'm splitting the QRF. I need someone solid on the east wall sector." Emma looked at the display. The east wall was the FOB's weakest point. The terrain beyond it was closer to the wire. The sight lines were compressed, and the sector had been flagged twice in the past month for ground disturbances that hadn't resolved into anything definitive. Ground disturbances, disturbed soil. "Sir," she kept her voice level, "east wall sector. Has there been any recent intel on device placement in that area?" "Nothing confirmed. Why?" "Flag it for EOD check before we commit personnel to the wall. I've been seeing a pattern in the sector that—" "We don't have time for EOD right now, Walker." He turned back to the display. "I need someone commanding east wall in the next 4 minutes." She understood. 7 to 9 vehicles on the west approach was not a situation that allowed for measured deliberation. The east wall needed a defender. The timeline was what the timeline was. He was looking at her. She thought about standing outside his office this morning, the 4 minutes in the hallway. She thought about Hernandez on the berm, and her finger on the trigger, and 5 seconds, and 5 things you can touch. She thought about Jack Doyle sitting outside her door. She thought about the technical analysis on the footlocker, radio frequency trigger, remote detonation, and she thought about the things she had almost told Aldridge, the ground disturbances in the east wall sector, the pattern she'd been tracking, the thread that had been pulling taut since Briggs said getting more common. The east wall was where she was being sent, a sector with disturbed soil and compressed sightlines, and a threat force moving toward it. "Sir," she said again, "I want to go on record. East sector ground needs a check before we put boots at the base of that wall." "Noted. I'll flag it for after." He met her eyes. "Walker, can you hold that wall?" The impossible choice. She was not sure she could trust herself with a weapon under fire. She had been 4 seconds from shooting Hernandez on her own perimeter. She had been 1 command away from Aldridge knowing that. But the east wall needed someone who knew how to read ground, who had spent 2 months learning the pattern signatures in this sector, who had found 2 pressure plates at grid 9-2 and noted the disturbed soil at grid 6-4 and filed away the word remote. Sending someone else meant sending someone who didn't have that knowledge. The logic of it was uncomfortable and undeniable. She thought about what Doyle had said. "Your enemy isn't out there anymore. It's in here." He was right, but the enemy was also out there. Both things were true simultaneously, and she had to function in the space where they overlapped. "Yes, sir," she said. "I can hold the wall." She took Reyes and Hansen and Corporal Mendez, who was solidly competent and asked good questions. They moved to the east wall at a jog. The sounds from the west side were already building. Radio traffic, vehicle noise, the flat crack of the first exchange of fire as the QRF made contact. Emma deployed them along the wall in a pattern that maximized sightlines while keeping them off the ground closest to the wire. "Base of the wall," she said. "Nobody goes within 10 meters of the wire. Nobody crosses this line." She drew it in the gravel with her boot, "without my direct order. Questions?" Hansen opened his mouth. "Good," she said. "Eyes on." The ringing in her left ear was present. She noted it the way she noted the temperature and the wind direction, as environmental data. The east approach showed movement at 0814. Figures on the ridge above the FOB's eastern perimeter, moving carefully. 4, maybe 5. "Reyes," she said quietly. "East Ridge, 2 o'clock. "Got them." He had his rifle up. "Waiting. Don't engage until I call it. They may be trying to draw fire. See where our positions are." The figures on the ridge stopped moving. For 40 seconds, nothing happened. The ringing spiked. Emma looked at the ground in front of the wall, at the wire, at the compressed terrain between the wire and the first natural cover point, where an attacker would have to cross 25 meters of open ground. 25 meters of open ground. The IED she'd found at grid 9-2 had been placed at the approach to open ground. A choke point, same logic. She scanned the ground inside the wire. There, 12 meters from the wall base. She almost missed it. The gravel had been raked back into place with care, but the fill pattern was slightly off. The kind of slightly that you noticed after 2 months of route clearance and one very specific briefing from an EOD tech about the difference between contact and remote initiation. All elements, hold position. She kept her voice controlled. Nobody moves toward the wire. Mendez, on me. She moved to the disturbed patch, crouched, looked without touching. The assembly was there. She could see the edge of it, barely, just the corner of a pressure plate housing peeking through the gravel. And running from it, barely visible, a thin wire. She traced the wire with her eyes. It ran east toward the wall, not into the ground. Along the ground, tucked into the base of the wall, to a small box, 10 centimeters square, zip-tied to the wall's interior face. A receiver, radio frequency receiver. The attack on the west side was a diversion. They had placed this before the attack began, before the threat level red call, during the days of access they'd had when the FOB's attention was forward-oriented. The mortar attacks, the harassment fire, the 2 weeks of making the FOB look west, always look west. The east approach movement was to draw the defenders to this wall. When the FOB's east defensive element was at the base of that wall, when they were standing in the kill zone, someone with a radio transmitter would push a button. Radio frequency trigger, getting more common. Mendez, very quiet, get everyone off the wall. Now, back to the barracks line. Go. What are we? Now, move. She stayed. She was looking at the receiver box, the wire, the pressure plate housing. She could not disarm this. She didn't have the tools, and she didn't have the training. What she could do was not let anyone stand in the kill zone. She keyed her radio. TOC, this is Walker, East Wall. We have a confirmed device at the base of the wall interior. Command wire RF system. Request EOD immediately, and all East Wall personnel are to remain clear of a 15-meter radius from my position. TOC. Copy, Walker. EOD is standby. EOD is committed west side. Can you? I can hold position and mark the device. I cannot disarm. Get me EOD when you can. She looked at the receiver box. And tell them it's RF triggered. Whoever placed this may still have the transmitter. TOC. Copy. Stay on comms. She crouched 3 meters from the device and waited. The ringing in her left ear was very loud. She named 5 things she could touch. The gravel, her rifle stock, the wall behind her, the cold air, the weight of her armor. She counted her breathing. She stayed. The attack on the west side lasted 19 minutes. Emma listened to it on the radio. The exchange of fire, the QRF's movement, Aldridge's command calls, while crouching 3 meters from a device that someone was waiting to detonate. She thought about the transmitter operator, somewhere outside the wire, watching, waiting for the moment when the east wall was fully manned. She had gotten everyone off the wall before that moment arrived. The attack on the west wound down at 08:33. 2 enemy casualties confirmed. 1 FOB personnel, Specialist Torres, with a through-and-through to the shoulder. Not life-threatening. At 08:47, Briggs arrived at the east wall with his kit. He looked at her crouched position, looked at the device, looked at the receiver box. RF system, he said. Yes. Same construction as the one at 9-2? She thought about it. Similar, more sophisticated. They're getting better. He began his approach protocol, slow, methodical, the practiced calm of a man who had done this a very large number of times. How long have you been sitting here? 33 minutes. He glanced at her. Okay. He moved past her. Back to 15 meters, Walker. I know the drill. I know you do. Back to 15. She moved back. She stood at the 15-meter mark and watched Briggs work, and felt the specific texture of the past 33 minutes settling into her body. The controlled breathing, the named things, the radio calls she'd made clearly and correctly. She had identified the device. She had gotten her people out. She had held position and stayed on comms and done everything correctly, with the ringing in her ear at full volume and the replay of Logar Province cycling somewhere in the back of her skull the entire time. Jack Doyle appeared at the barracks line. He looked at the device, looked at Briggs working, looked at Emma at the 15-meter mark. He walked up beside her and stood there without speaking. RF trigger, she said. I heard. Same cell that's been running the harassment fire. Probably the same cell that placed the one at 9-2. They used the mortar attacks to orient our attention west. Placed the device during a rotation change, probably 3 days ago. She had worked this out in the 33 minutes. The device in Logar Province, same method, he said quietly. She already knew. She had known it in some operational part of her brain since the moment she'd seen the receiver box. The IED in Logar Province had been command detonated. Remote trigger. A man with a transmitter had watched Route Clearance Team 7 approach the grid, had waited, had chosen his moment. It was the same cell, possibly the same bomb maker, definitely the same method. She hadn't missed a pressure plate. A man had pushed a button. She had known this since last night, from the technical analysis Doyle had shown her. But knowing it from a document, and knowing it from the direct evidence of a device she had just found with her own hands and eyes, that was different. That was the thing becoming real. She felt it arrive. Not as relief, there was nothing relieving about any of this, but as a shift in the weight. The story she had been carrying, you failed, you missed it, Decker paid for your mistake, did not have the architecture she had given it. The architecture was someone else's. Someone who had built a device and positioned it and waited for the right moment and made a choice. She had not made that choice. And for the first time since Logar Province, that sentence felt true in her body, not just in her head. You okay? Doyle asked. No, she said, but I'm here. He nodded. Briggs cleared the device at 0923. He found 3 more ground disturbances within the 15-meter radius that turned out to be animal activity. The FOB stood down from threat level red at 1040. Emma filed her incident report at 11:30. It was detailed, accurate, and included a recommendation that all future east wall rotations be preceded by a ground check of the interior perimeter. Aldridge read it in her presence. When he finished, he looked at her for a long moment. She let him look. She had nothing to hide in this particular piece of paper. It was accurate, it was professional, and it documented exactly what had happened and exactly what she had done. Whatever came next would come next. Good work today, Staff Sergeant. Thank you, sir. He set the report down on his desk. He laced his fingers together. Walk me through the East Wall decision. Why you pulled everyone back before EOD confirmed. She told him, not the version she'd tell in a formal debrief, the measured, jargon-appropriate version, but the operational reasoning as it had actually unfolded. The ground disturbance pattern, the receiver box, the RF trigger signature, the 2 weeks of harassment fire reorienting the FOB's attention. He listened. He asked 2 clarifying questions. He was quiet for a moment afterward. If you'd kept your people at that wall, they'd have been in the kill zone when the transmitter operator pushed the button, she said. Yes, sir. He nodded slowly. My office, 700 tomorrow. She knew what 700 tomorrow meant. She had known it was coming since she'd stood outside his office that morning and walked away. She had spent the day earning the right to walk through that door. "Yes, sir," she said. She was in Aldridge's office at 700. He had coffee waiting. 2 cups, which meant he'd expected this to be a conversation and not a briefing. She noted this and sat down. He didn't start with the east wall. He started earlier. "Grid 4 to 7, he said. "Day 11 of the rotation. 8-second pause on the route check." "Yes, sir." Morales flagged it. "I noted it. I should have acted on it sooner." He looked at her steadily. "That's on me." She hadn't expected that. "Sir, let me finish." He wasn't harsh about it, just precise. "I knew you'd come back to theater faster than was probably wise. The Army's timeline and the right timeline are not always the same timeline. I watched you, and I waited to see if you'd self-correct. And I watched you almost shoot 2 people before I did anything about it." She sat with that. "Hernandez," she said. "Reyes came to me after." He held up a hand. "He wasn't reporting you. He was asking for guidance on how to support you. He was worried." He paused. "That's the kind of team you built, Walker. People who want to help. That matters." She didn't answer. "Yesterday you identified a device that would have killed everyone on that wall." He kept his voice level. "You did it correctly. You got your people clear. You held position. You maintained comms. That was exceptional work under pressure." "I almost wasn't there to do it," she said. "I almost talked myself out of taking that wall." "But you didn't." "But I almost did." "Yes," he put his coffee down. "That's why we're having this conversation. Not because of what happened, because of what almost happened, and what almost happened before that." He leaned forward. "I'm pulling you from field operations." She had known. She had known it was coming. She still felt it land. "For how long?" "Behavioral health assessment first. Then we go from there." He met her eyes. "This isn't punitive. You haven't done anything wrong. You're carrying a load that your nervous system can't manage in the field right now, and the field is not where that load gets addressed." "The team is short," she said. It came out flat, not an argument, just a statement of fact. "I know. We'll manage." He picked up her incident report from his desk. "You wrote in here that the east wall ground check should be standard pre-rotation procedure." "Yes, sir." "That recommendation is going in as SOP, your name on it." He set it back down. "You're going to help me from the TOC. Route analysis, pattern assessment, pre-mission intel review. All the things you're exceptionally good at that don't require you to be in the field with a weapon." He paused. "For now." She understood the weight of "for now." "When?" she asked. "This morning, behavioral health at 0900. She had come in here knowing this was coming and had told herself she had made peace with it. And now that it was real, she found that making peace with a thing in theory and receiving it in practice were the same difference that Doyle had described between reading about a mechanism and being inside it. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" He looked mildly surprised. He had expected more friction. "I made a commitment 3 days ago," she said. "I'm keeping it." He nodded slowly. He didn't ask what commitment or to whom. He seemed to understand that the details were not the point. "You'll stay on the FOB. You'll keep your rank and your position. Nothing in your file reflects anything other than a standard behavioral health referral." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. You earned the referral." He said it without irony. He meant it as it sounded, that getting to a place where you could be helped was itself a form of work. 0900, Captain Reeves. She's good." Emma stood. "Walker." She turned at the door. "What you found on that wall yesterday?" He stopped. "A lot of soldiers wouldn't have seen it. A lot of very good soldiers. You saw it because of 2 months of pattern work and because you've been paying the kind of attention that this environment demands." He looked at her. "Whatever else is happening, that part of you is intact. Don't lose it." She went to behavioral health at 0900. Captain Reeves was a small woman in her early 40s, who had the specific quality of stillness that Emma had come to associate with people who had learned to wait without filling space. She had a notepad but didn't use it. She asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. Emma told her the truth. Not all of it in the first hour. Truth had a sequence, and the sequence mattered. But enough. The ringing, the sounds in the dark, the 2 moments with the weapon, the 5 things technique, Doyle's coffee at 0400, the technical analysis of the Logar Province device. Reeves listened. She asked 4 questions. She wrote nothing down. At the end of the hour, she said, "You've been doing significant amounts of self-management for a very long time. That's impressive, and it's also unsustainable, and you already know both of those things." "Yes. The fact that you're here is significant." She said it without theatrics, just as an accurate statement. "Most people at your stage of presentation don't come voluntarily. They come because something broke publicly. You're ahead of that curve." "I almost wasn't." "But you are." She made a note for the first time. "I'd like to see you daily for the next 2 weeks. 45 minutes. We'll build a formal plan after the initial assessment, but I can tell you now that medication is an option we should discuss, and that the self-management tools you've developed are actually solid. They just need a framework around them." Emma nodded. "The RF trigger disclosure," Reeves paused. "The information about the Logar Province device. How are you carrying that?" "Differently than before," Emma said. "Not better, different." "That's the honest answer." She set her pen down. "The guilt doesn't disappear when the factual basis for it is removed. The brain doesn't work that way. You'll grieve it. You'll probably also feel angry about the months you spent carrying something that wasn't yours. That's all appropriate. When does it start to feel true? When you start doing things that confirm a different story about yourself." She looked at Emma steadily. "You already started. Yesterday on the east wall." Emma looked at her hands. "I almost didn't take the assignment, but you took it, and you performed." She paused. "The brain updates its beliefs based on evidence. You're giving it new evidence. That's the work." She left at 10:15. She went to the TOC and reported to Morales, who briefed her on the morning route without any particular commentary on the circumstances that had brought her there instead of the field. Morales was good at a lot of things. Not making it worse was near the top of the list. She spent the afternoon on route analysis, the pattern work Aldridge had referenced. She had 3 weeks of daily route data and 2 months of incident reports, and the particular knowledge of someone who had personally cleared the sectors under discussion. She found 4 anomalies in the pattern data that hadn't been flagged in the formal analysis. She wrote them up and sent them to Aldridge with a recommendation for targeted surveillance. He sent back a single line, "Good eyes." She went to dinner. She ate the rice. Doyle found her afterward, at the small table outside the chow hall where people went to drink coffee and look at the mountains. "How was Reeves?" "Good," Emma said. "She's good." "Yes," he sat down. "She helped me, 2018. I had a contract in the Panjshir, and I came back." He stopped. "A different chapter. Doesn't matter. She helped." Emma looked at him. "You've been seeing her this deployment?" "Monthly check-in. Standard for long-term contractors in high-threat environments." He picked up his coffee. "Not the same as what you're doing, but I've stopped thinking of it as separate from the job." "Maintenance." "Exactly. Same as cleaning your weapon." He looked at the mountains. "How are you?" "Ask me tomorrow," she said. "Today was a lot." He accepted this. They sat in the quiet of the mountain evening and didn't need to fill it. 12 days passed. Emma went to Reeves every morning at 8:30. She worked the TOC in the afternoon. She ran in the mornings and slept at night in the fragmented but functional way that Reeves called within normal range for theater operations, and Emma called better than nothing. The mortar attack stopped after day 4. S2 assessed that the cell had been disrupted. 2 members identified through signals intelligence One confirmed eliminated, the rest dispersed. The harassment fire campaign had been the setup for the East Wall operation. And with that operation failed and the device recovered and exploited for intelligence, the cell's immediate capacity was degraded. The FOB settled into the specific rhythm of a deployment in its third month. Not comfortable, not safe, but familiar. The mountains held their position against the sky. The generator hummed. The water purification tablets did their quiet work. Emma's pattern analysis had yielded results. One of her flagged anomalies led to an off-route cache find, 3 IEDs, and a partial initiator assembly that matched the construction signature from the East Wall device. Briggs had called it the same hands, with the confidence of a man who had learned to read bomb maker signatures the way a forensic analyst reads handwriting. Same hands, same method. The cell that had built the device in Logar Province was operating in this sector. She had found them, not with a weapon, from a table in the TOC with route data and incident reports, and the pattern recognition that Aldridge had told her was intact. She told Reeves about this in their session on day 9. Reeves said, "How does that feel?" Emma thought about it. "Like evidence," she said, "of the thing you said, that the brain updates based on evidence." "Is it updating?" Slowly, she paused. "I still hear the replay, but it comes less often. And when it comes, She stopped. "The distance is different. It's still real, but I'm not inside it the same way." "That's progress," Reeves said. "Real progress, not the performed version." On day 12, Morales came to her in the TOC at 1400. "I need someone on the ground for an anomaly at grid 6-4, he said. "The surveillance you flagged picked up activity last night. EOD wants a route check before they go in." He paused. "I can send Kim," he said, "but you know that sector better than anyone on the team." She understood what he was asking. He wasn't ordering her, he was giving her the choice. She looked at Aldridge's office door. Aldridge was in a command brief. She could wait for him, or she could make a decision. She thought about what Reeves had said. "You're giving the brain new evidence." "Let me talk to Reeves," she said. She was back in 20 minutes. "I'll go," she said. "Foot patrol only. No dismounted solo ops. Reyes partners with me the whole route. I stay in radio contact with TOC, and I abort at my own discretion. No questions asked." Morales nodded. "That works." "One more thing," she looked at him. "If I freeze, if I have any kind of episode in the field, Reyes has authority to call the abort, not me." Morales studied her. "You trust him with that?" "I trust him with everything," she said. "That's the point." He nodded again. "Get your kit." She found Reyes in the motor pool. He was checking his rifle with the specific focus of someone who used maintenance as meditation. He looked up when she walked in. "Morales tell you?" she asked. "That you were coming back out?" "Yeah." He kept his voice neutral. "Grid 6-4. "Yes." She picked up her kit and began the check. "I need you to know something before we go." "Okay. If I freeze, if you see me acquire a target I shouldn't be acquiring, I need you to say my name. Just my name, like you did at the South Perimeter." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing that anyway." She looked at him. "Since that night," he said, "I've been watching, covering your angles when you stop, doing the head count so you don't have to." He said it without pride, just as a statement of operational practice. "You didn't ask me to, but that's what partners do." She held that for a moment. "I should have talked to you sooner." "Probably," he agreed, "but you're here now." He finished his rifle check and stood up. "Let's go look at grid 6-4. They went. The foot patrol from the south gate to grid 6-4 was 2 kilometers over familiar terrain. Emma moved with Reyes on her left, the radio on her right, the morning light doing what mountain morning light did, filling the terrain with a clarity that made everything look simple and obvious, which it wasn't. She watched the road. At the 1 kilometer mark, the ringing started in her left ear. She noted it, named it, continued. At 1.4 kilometers, she heard something that might have been a child's voice. She stopped. Reyes stopped with her, no questions. She listened. The sound came again. She tracked it, east, toward a compound wall, the kind of low mud brick structure that appeared every few hundred meters through this part of the valley. A real child, actually real. She could tell the difference now. Not always, not reliably under pressure. But in this light, with this much sleep behind her, with Reyes a meter to her left, she could feel the difference between a sound that was there and a sound that her brain had manufactured. Compound, she said. Local national, not a threat. Copy, Reyes said. They kept moving. Grid 6-4 was a road bend above a dried creek bed, and the anomaly she'd flagged in the pattern data was immediately visible on approach. The specific disturbance signature that she had learned to read over 2 months on these routes. Fresh work. Done carefully, but not carefully enough. She crouched. She ran the detector over the approach. She found the device at 1.2 meters from the road edge. Small, well-concealed, command wire running north into the creek bed. Not RF this time. Older method, physical initiation. Same cell, different bomb maker, or the same bomb maker trying a different approach after the east wall device had been recovered and analyzed. She marked the position and called EOD. Then she stood up and looked at the road and felt something that she had not expected to feel. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter. She had run this route. She had read this ground. She had found this thing. The ringing in her left ear was still there. The replay of Logar Province was still somewhere in the architecture of her nervous system, available, waiting. She was not healed. She was not fixed. But she was here, on this road, doing the work. She hadn't missed it. The final attack on FOB Kharif came on the 41st day of the rotation, at 0220. Not mortar fire, not a probing harassment, a full ground assault. 12 to 15 attackers, east and west simultaneously, with a specific coordination that indicated planning and a commander who knew how to execute it. Emma was in the TOC when the first shots hit the wire. She had her kit on and was moving before Aldridge gave the first order, because the TOC's tactical display showed exactly what she'd been tracking in the pattern data for a week. The enemy had been repositioning. She had flagged it. The surveillance had been tasked. The analysis had been written up. It had arrived too slowly. West wall is primary contact, Aldridge said. He was fast, she noted. Command decisions in seconds. No wasted motion. East wall. East wall is the real push, Emma said. West is a diversion. Same playbook as the device. Draw attention forward, hit from behind. They've got 3 days of pattern on our response times. Aldridge looked at her. 1 second. You're sure? No, but the surveillance data from the past 72 hours shows heavier movement east. Less than what's generating the contact west. That's wrong. She pointed at the display. That's too quiet. He held for 2 seconds. East wall, full defensive posture. Nobody at the base of the wall until EOD clears it. He looked at her. You're with me in the TOC. Sir. TOC, Walker. Firm but not harsh. That's where your skills are tonight. She wanted to push back. She could feel the specific pull of it. The desire to be outside, on the wall, in the physical space of the fight rather than the abstracted space of the display. She had spent 3 weeks in the TOC doing work that mattered. She knew the work mattered. She also knew why she wanted to be outside. It wasn't tactical. It was the old logic. If I'm there, if I can see it, if I can control the immediate geometry of the problem. The logic that had served her on many deployments and was now, in its current form, unreliable. She stayed in the TOC. She watched the display. She called the pattern. She was right about the east wall. The secondary push came at 0238, Lighter than the west contact, but more deliberate, probing for the weak point the attackers expected to find. They didn't find it. Morales had his team positioned along the wall's upper edge, not the base. The sight lines were better, and the kill zone below was empty. When the attackers came over the outer berm, they came into a prepared defense. The fight at the east wall lasted 7 minutes. Emma heard it through the radio, and through the TOC's speaker system, and through the thin walls of the operations center, the flat percussion of small arms fire, and the heavier crack of the crew-served weapons on the roof. She tracked it on the display and called positions and fed Aldridge the pattern read in real time. East wall secondary element is pulling back, she said. They're going to try to consolidate west. That's where they've got the most contact. If we redeploy the QRF element from the east now, they'll be caught in the open on the west approach in about 90 seconds. Aldridge keyed his radio. The QRF moved. They caught the consolidating enemy force in the open. The fight on the west side ended at 0301. Total duration, 41 minutes. FOB casualties, 2 wounded, neither life-threatening. Specialist Torres again. He had extraordinary luck in the wrong direction. A new name, PFC Harrison, with a graze on his forearm that would leave a scar, and a story. Enemy casualties, 4 confirmed, multiple suspected wounded. The FOB stood. Emma stood at the TOC display in the silence after the radio traffic died and looked at the grid overlay and the position markers and the patterns she had been building for 3 weeks, and she understood something about the kind of soldier she was becoming. Not smaller, not diminished, different. She had stopped the east wall attack from the TOC. She had seen the pattern and called it correctly and given Aldridge the read he needed at the moment he needed it. She had done this with the ringing in her ear and the replay cycling somewhere in the back of her nervous system, and Reyes's voice in her memory saying her name. She had done it from here. That was its own kind of holding the line. The FOB quieted by 0400. Cleanup, accountability, the logistics of the aftermath, equipment checks, ammunition counts, the careful documentation of everything that had happened and everything that had been expended. Emma stayed in the TOC through most of it, helping Aldridge build the incident report while the information was fresh and the sources were accessible. At 0500, Reyes found her. He had a cut above his left eye. Gravel fragment, he said, from a round that had hit the wall near his position. Already cleaned and dressed, not serious. Good call on the east wall, he said. Morales said you saw it coming. Pattern data. She shook her head. Morales's team made the good call, getting into position without being at the base of the wall. You told Aldridge to tell them that. I told Aldridge what the display showed. He made the call. Reyes looked at her. Stop doing that. Doing what? Distributing your own credit. He said it without irritation, just as a direct observation. You called it. It worked. That's yours. She looked at the display for a moment, at the east wall marker and the position overlay and the 72 hours of surveillance data that had built the picture. Okay, she said, that's mine. Good. He wiped a drop of blood from the dressing above his eye. How are you? I'm here, she said. He accepted this. He had heard her say it before and understood it as the accurate report it was. Not everything okay, not broken, just present and functional. That was enough. In this place, in this rotation, at 0500 after a 41-minute ground assault, it was more than enough. He went back to his team. She finished the report. Dawn came the way it always did at FOB Kharif. Without ceremony, without consideration for what had happened the night before, light filling the eastern sky in a slow gradient that turned the Hindu Kush from black to gray to the brief impossible gold before settling into the honest brown that was their actual color. Emma was on the south perimeter with her coffee when Doyle found her. He looked at the mountains. He didn't ask how the night had gone. He had been in the TOC for the last hour of it, watching from the back. and he already knew. "You stayed in the TOC," he said. "Yes, that was the right call." "I know." She looked at the mountains. It didn't feel like the right call. It felt like not being good enough to be outside. "That's the old story. I know that too." She drank her coffee. "I'm working on telling the difference." He was quiet for a moment. The mountains caught the early light and gave it back changed. "How's Reeves?" "She's good." Emma paused. "I told her I was going to finish the rotation and then do a full program. Not the minimum, a real one." "Good." She said the same thing you said, that it takes longer than I want to hear. "She's right." He looked at her. "You know what the difference is between where you are now and where I was at your stage?" She waited. "You're not running," he said. "I ran for years, kept moving, kept taking contracts, kept staying busy so there was no space for the thing to catch me. You're standing still and letting it come." He paused. "That takes more nerve than running." She thought about grid 6-4, about crouching over the device marker and feeling something quiet in the absence of the weight she'd been carrying wrong. "Jack," she said. "Yeah. Why were you outside my door? The first time. You'd known me for what, 3 days?" He considered this. "Because I saw you on the landing zone the day you arrived. 38 seconds, standing there counting." She looked at him. "I counted too," he said. "When I came back from my first rotation, stood on the tarmac at Fort Bragg for about 45 seconds, just waiting for something to happen. My wife was right there. She knew what it meant. She said," he stopped. He picked at the edge of his coffee cup. She said, "Come on, Jack, let's go home." And I went. "What happened?" "We stayed married for 22 years, he said, "until she got tired of me running, and I finally stopped, and by then, it was too late." He said it without drama, just as a fact that he had lived with long enough to handle. "She's in Portland now. We talk on holidays. She's okay. I'm okay." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made choices." He looked at the mountains. "The thing is, she could see it in 38 seconds. Some people can." He glanced at her. "You walked off that Chinook like someone who was holding everything very carefully. I recognized it. Figured I should probably be somewhere nearby." Emma looked at the gravel between her boots, at the concertina wire, at the mountains beyond it, indifferent and present and enormous. "Thank you," she said, "for being somewhere nearby." He dipped his head once. "Don't mention it." They stood in the mountain morning and drank their coffee and let the light change around them. 3 days before the end of the rotation, Emma asked Aldridge for a specific clearance. He read the request twice. "You want to go back to the Grid 9-2 sector?" he said. "Yes, sir. Foot patrol. Reyes with me. Full kit. I just want to walk the route." He looked at her. "Why?" She had thought about how to answer this. She could have given him the operational framing, pattern verification, updated route assessment, end of rotation sector documentation. All of it would have been technically accurate. None of it would have been the reason. "Because I need to look at it," she said, "without the weight I was carrying the last time." He was quiet for a moment. "Reeves cleared it?" "Yes, sir." He signed the request. She and Reyes went out the next morning. The sun was already up when they cleared the gate, the light doing its morning work on the terrain. She moved at a patrol pace that was unhurried without being slow. She watched the ground with the attention that 2 months of route clearance had built into her. Not anxious attention, not the white-knuckle focus of someone expecting disaster, but the clean professional awareness of someone doing work they were good at. The road at Grid 9-2 looked like a road. Brown gravel and compacted earth, and the occasional stone pushed aside by vehicle traffic. The wadi was dry. The ridge above it was empty. The morning light came over the eastern shoulder of the mountain and lit the sector without drama. She walked the approach route. She walked the point where she had found the pressure plates weeks ago. She walked the spot where she had frozen for 8 seconds on the first route clearance, the pause that Morales had flagged and Aldridge had noted. She stood there. She listened to the ringing in her left ear. She named 5 things she could touch: the rifle stock, the gravel, the dry, cold air, Reyes's presence on her left, the weight of the armor on her shoulders. She looked at the road. She thought about Logar Province, about the morning, about Decker's voice on the radio and the moment she had called the route clear, and the man 400 meters away who had waited for the right second and pushed a button. She had not missed it. The road at Grid 9-2 was the same road she had cleared twice and found devices on both times. It was the road that had taught her the pattern. It was the road she had worked while carrying a story about her own failure that was factually wrong. She stood on it now carrying something different. Not the absence of weight, she was not naive enough to expect that, but a different weight, more accurate, more honest about what had actually happened and what her actual role in it had been. She had been a soldier doing her job in a hostile environment against an adaptive enemy who was getting smarter and better resourced. She had done her job well. She had also been human, and being human in that environment had costs, and the costs were real, and they were hers to carry. But they were the right size now, not inflated by guilt that belonged to someone else. "You good?" Reyes asked. She thought about it, gave it the actual weight of consideration rather than the reflexive answer. "Getting there," she said. He nodded. "Good enough." They turned and walked back toward the FOB. On the last evening of the rotation, Emma found Doyle at the small table outside the chow hall. She had her coffee. He had his. The mountains were doing the thing they did at dusk, going dark in a sequence that moved from the peaks down, the snow lines disappearing first, then the gray-brown faces, until the whole range was a silhouette against a sky that couldn't decide between blue and black. "Last night," she said. "Yes." He turned his cup. "How do you feel?" She thought about the question with the same care she'd given Reyes's version of it. Like someone who has been carrying the wrong thing for a long time and is starting to figure out what the right thing weighs. She paused. "The wrong thing is still there, but it's smaller, or I'm larger. I'm not sure which." "Both, probably." He looked at the mountains. "You know what the next part is hard?" "What?" "Going home." He said it simply. "The FOB has a structure. The rotation has an end date. You know what the days look like here. Going home is a different kind of exposure. No wire, no watch rotation, no shared context with the people around you." He glanced at her. "Reeves will help with that, but I'm telling you it's coming." "I know." She had read about it. She also knew, now, that reading about it and being inside it were different physics. "You'll be okay," he said. "I know that too." She surprised herself a little saying it, but it was true in the way that things became true. Not through certainty, but through the accumulation of evidence. Grid 6-4. The TOC during the ground assault. The walk at Grid 9-2. Reeves at 0830 for 12 days. Coffee with Jack Doyle at various hours of the night. Reyes saying her name. "You don't beat it," Doyle said. He was looking at the mountains. "You just learn to stand with it." She had heard him say something like this before. She had held it at arm's length, the way you hold information you're not ready for. Now she turned it over and found it was not a comfort so much as a description. Not "it gets better," but "this is the shape of how you carry it." That was more useful than comfort. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They sat in the last of the light until the mountains were just a darkness, and the stars came out over the Hindu Kush the way they always did. Indifferent, present, enormous. Emma finished her coffee. She went to her barracks. She lay on her bunk in the dark and listened to the ambient sounds of the FOB, the generator, the distant radio, trans breathing across the room, and let her nervous system sort through them. All present, all accounted for. She slept. The Chinook came at 0800. They loaded in the same way they had unloaded, practical, organized, without ceremony. Duffels and weapons and the accumulated weight of 43 days. Morales did the head count. Everyone was there. Emma was the last one on. She stood at the ramp for a moment and looked back at the FOB, at the concertina wire, and the guard towers, and the gravel landing zone, and the small table outside the chow hall, and the south perimeter wall, and the mountains that held everything in place. She thought about what she was taking with her. The ringing in her left ear. Still there, quieter than it had been, or maybe she had gotten better at not being surprised by it. She would be working on this for a long time. She understood that now, not as a failure, but as a fact. The way altitude is a fact, or distance, or the physics that Jack Doyle had described, and that she had gradually, imperfectly, begun to understand from the inside. She thought about the east wall, about grid 6-4, about the TOC at 0238 with the display in front of her, and Aldridge's voice asking, "You're sure?" and her own voice saying, "No, but." The no but, the thing you commit to when certainty is unavailable, and the mission still requires a call. She thought about Decker's letter she had never sent. She would write it on the flight. She didn't know yet what it would say. She suspected she would start drafting it in her head on the way to Bagram and spend several hours finding the right version. But she would write it. It wasn't an apology. She understood that now. It was something else, an acknowledgement, a reaching across the space between what had happened and where they both were now, and what that space had cost them both, and what it had not. She thought about Reeves. 0830, every morning for the next phase. She thought about Jack Doyle, who would be on a different flight out, heading toward a different contract in a different country, carrying what he carried in the way he had learned to carry it. She stepped onto the ramp. The Chinook lifted. FOB Kharif fell away below them. The gravel shelf cut into the Hindu Kush like a bad decision someone had stopped arguing about. The wire and the towers and the chow hall and the small table outside it and the mountains above it all, enormous and indifferent, and there. She watched it until it was just a shape, and then just a color, and then just the mountains with their permanent snow and their patient indifference to everything happening at their feet. She turned forward. The Chinook flew east, into the morning. Emma Walker was not healed. She was not fixed, but she was not running. She was here.